The epistle for today is the last Sunday after Pentecost, that is the 24th Sunday after Pentecost, is taken from St. Paul's epistle to the Colossians. Therefore we also, from the day that we heard it, cease not to pray for you, and to beg that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will, in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, that you may walk worthy of God in all things pleasing, being fruitful in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all might according to the power of his glory, in all patience and long-suffering with joy, giving thanks to God the Father, who hath made us worthy to be partakers of the lot of the saints in light, who hath delivered us from the power of darkness, and hath translated us into the kingdom of the Son of his love, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the remission of sins. The Gospel is taken from that of St. Matthew. When therefore you shall see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, he that readeth, let him understand. Then they that are in Judea, let them flee to the mountains. And he that is on the housetop, let him not come down to take anything out of his house. And he that is in the field, let him not go back to take his coat. And woe to them that are with child and give suck in those days. But pray that your flight be not in the winter or on the Sabbath. For there shall then be great tribulation, such hath not been from the beginning of the world until now, neither shall be. And unless those days have been shortened, no flesh should be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days shall be shortened. Then if any man shall say to you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, do not believe him. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, inasmuch as to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told it to you beforehand. If therefore they shall say to you, Behold, he is in the desert, go ye not out. Behold, he is in the closets, believe it not. For as lightning cometh out of the east, and appeareth even unto the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Wheresoever the body shall be, there shall the eagles also be gathered together. And immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be moved. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with much power and majesty. And he shall send his angels with a trumpet and a great voice, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest parts of the heavens to the utmost bounds of them. And from the fig tree learn a parable. When the branch thereof is now tender, and the leaves come forth, you know that summer is nigh. So you also, when you shall see all these things, know ye that it is nigh even at the doors. Amen, I say to you, that this generation shall not pass till all these things shall be done. Heaven and earth shall pass, but my words shall not pass. Thus are the words of today's Holy Gospel. You may be seated. When therefore you shall see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, he that readeth, let him understand. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death.
Our Lady La Conquistadora,
Pray for us.
St. Francis and St. Dominic.
Pray for us.
So today we have in the calendar the last Sunday of the year. And therefore the Gospel is about the end of the world and the signs leading up to the very end of history. It begins, this passage, with the abomination of desolation. And unfortunately that has been misunderstood as to what that means exactly. The primary meaning of that is literal, that in the actual temple of Jerusalem, there's going to be set up this idol, which is going to be worshipped as God. And finally, that idol will be the Antichrist himself, who in the temple in Jerusalem is going to demand the adoration due to God alone. So the first meaning of the abomination of desolation is that at the end of time, the Jews are going to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And after doing so, there's going to be this abomination, which St. Jerome says refers to idols, or an idol, which is placed in the temple. And in fact has another meaning too, because this has already happened, because in the temple of Jerusalem was actually placed already a statue. After the first Jewish revolt, around the time, right before, about the time when Jerusalem fell, or right after I should say, when the Romans took over, they put in the temple this statue of a god, that is of an emperor as god. Later there was placed the statue of Hadrian, the Emperor Hadrian, on horseback in the ruins of the temple. And St. Jerome mentions that that was still there when he was alive. But it refers primarily to this thing which will happen at the end of the world with the Antichrist. But it means something else too, interestingly enough. In the breviary of today, you have in the last nocturne, it's called. So in the office of matins, you have 3 sets of nocturnes. So 3 psalms, then 3 readings. That's the first nocturne. Then 3 psalms and 3 readings is the second nocturne. And 3 psalms and 3 readings is the third nocturne. So there's 3 nocturnes, because they used to be said at nighttime. That's why they're called nocturnes. The 3 nocturnes, and the last one is this passage. Every Sunday, the last nocturne is always a commentary on the Gospel of the Sunday. And today the church chose the commentary of St. Jerome on this passage. So the church is sort of passing on to us the interpretation of this text from St. Jerome. And St. Jerome mentions, as I said, firstly, the statue actually at the temple. Secondly, the question of the end of the world and the Antichrist. But thirdly, he says spiritually, this is referring to another thing which is coming, which is symbolizes false doctrine. So the abomination of desolation is false doctrine, which he says stands in the holy place, which is the church. So it's very curious, the church herself chose to comment on this passage at the very end of the church's year, a commentary which speaks about a falling away within the church herself. So it's not just some crazy traditionalist that made up the question of a crisis of doctrine. Because St. Jerome, in the very passage, which is read by traditionally anyway, read by every Catholic priest and every religious who was bound to say the office, or lay people if they were saying the office, you have this commentary in which St. Jerome speaks about false doctrine within the church being something which takes place near the end. And therefore, he comments on this latter thing about, fly to the mountains, referring to us having to fly in the face of false doctrine in the church to Christ himself, who is, in the Old Testament, one of the symbols of Christ are the everlasting hills, they're called, everlasting mountains. And this is a symbol then of Christ that we're to fly to in the time in which this false doctrine enters into the church. So again, this is something the church had been proposing to be read by her priests for years and years and years and years. This warning of what is going to happen in the last times. Because the church wanted to warn her faithful. And curiously enough, that's precisely, you have this revision of the office, and then you have a new office altogether now, and that's gone. No more warning, because of course there's not going to be any problem. The problem is there is a problem. And the problem is one precisely now, a false doctrine which has entered into the church. It's a great tragedy in which the church usually, who is taught usually so openly among the nations, the truth suddenly finds herself invaded by this abomination of desolation, which is precisely false teaching or false doctrine. How do we react is the question. The first thing we have to react with is faith. The devil is clever. Against every spark of goodness, the devil will try to tempt to destroy it, however it appears. And obviously, in the case of those people, those among us who are trying to hold on to the tradition of the church in the face of this darkness, which has entered it, as Paul VI referred to it, I might say, as the smoke of Satan, which has entered into the church also. Against the smoke of Satan, the temptation the devil will try to use against us is to cause us always to look at the sins of the other. Now that doesn't mean we just think that there's no sin, otherwise we would be fighting anything. It'd be everything wonderful and sunshine and everything. That's not the way, it's not that. But it's a question of when we react to evil, and that's the big question. If the devil can get us to react to evil by turning our eyes away from ourselves, so that we're always looking at somebody else's evil, or to rile us up so that we sort of have a thirst for scandal, you might say. So that as every scandal comes about in the church now, every false teacher, every kind of false doctrine, all the way up to the top, from the Pope himself, the temptation the devil will try to use is to cause a spirit within us, a spirit of agitation. Be very careful, because the spirit of agitation is normally the sign of the devil's presence. Because Christ wishes to give peace to our soul, even in a situation of great suffering. The martyrs had peace. They had peace in the midst of suffering. They were being torn to pieces. And yet they did not lose an internal peace, because they had a good conscience and the presence of Christ within them, the presence of the Blessed Trinity, even in the midst of all that horror of seeing people killed by beasts in all sorts of horrible ways that the Romans decided to kill the Christians. They did not lose peace. They still had charity toward God and to their neighbor, and they did not lose an internal peace. The devil will want you to lose your internal peace, so that you're always worried about the latest scandal. You have to be very, very careful. I've seen it over and over and over and over again. People really agitated, a kind of spirit of almost despair, but they wouldn't admit it to themselves. But a spirit of agitation always in the soul. The devil wants your soul clouded and your eyes turned away from sin, especially one's own sin. Because as the invitation of Christ says, rarely are we ever profited by the knowledge of someone else's sin. It doesn't make us better at all, normally. What it does is focus our eyes on the sins of others. And the devil wants our own sin to stay there, certainly. So we must have a confidence in God instead, a trust in God, because all of this has already been prophesied. God didn't suddenly wake up one day and find the church in chaos. He knew from all eternity this was going to happen. Our Lord tells us in this passage about all the signs of the end, signs which are so bad regarding the Christians, that our Lord says that if God did not intervene, even the elect would be deceived. That's serious. Even the elect would be deceived if God did not intervene to prevent it. So God knew from all eternity this crisis, and this is even the biggest crisis, I don't think, what we're going through now. Possibly is, but I don't see how it's possible. But it's certainly like the final crisis, complete falling away from the faith and the rising up of the Antichrist. We may not have the Antichrist, but we certainly have those who are like him, a kind of prefigurement of what's to come, the total falling away by Christians around the world. Catholics, I should say, because the Christians are Catholics, there's no difference between them. You're not Catholic, you're not Christian. So the Catholic Christians, they've been warned of within the church this great falling away, this great tribulation that the faithful will have to go through, so bad, as our Lord said, insomuch as to deceive, if possible, even the elect, that the time will have to be shortened. Also will be no faith left. Very serious. But we're going to a time of precisely, though, like the end, in which the faith is attacked, in which is a great lack of faith, the sign of what is to come. And it can even affect us as I said, when we get so distraught and distressed by this present situation that we almost give up hope. But God knows the end of the story. God has already foretold His victory, which came through the cross firstly, but at the end we know that the Antichrist will be totally destroyed. All the powers of evil will be destroyed, and there will be this great judgment in the valley of Jehoshaphat, in which Christ will separate finally the sheep from the goats, the just from the unjust. There's no surprise for Christ. So we have to have a spirit of confidence because we know who's going to win this. We know that God will triumph, even in the midst of the suffering we're undergoing. And if we ask ourselves, why am I suffering now? Why could it be somebody else? Well, God sends a cross proportion to each one, for each time, in fact, a special temptation for each period. And we're in a period, obviously, of a temptation against the faith, but in no period was there ever an escape from the cross. It was always there. There was always suffering. You cannot be a Christian without carrying your cross. Our Lord said, if you would be my disciple, you must take up daily, you must deny yourself, take up daily your cross, and come follow me. Not once in a blue moon cross. Every day the cross. Every day suffering. Why? Because we're baptized into Christ. And Christ suffered. And therefore we, if we're to be Christians, must be made like Christ. And that's also why we, in this period, have a special mission to suffer in union with Christ for the souls of so many deceived. Many, many deceived, as you very well know. Those in your family, those of your friends, those of your acquaintances. They're all under this blanket attack of Satan, in which the faith is being severely tried, the faithful. And what do? We must accept willingly this cross. We must offer our sufferings for the salvation of souls, just like our Lord, who came for the salvation of souls. With confidence. Turn your eyes, if you must look at the sins, however, turn your eyes to your own sins, or my own sins in my case. So try to make good use of this cross, which we have been handed by our Lord. You know, there's no cross that our Lord is not giving us. We might want other crosses, but those aren't the crosses our Lord wishes. Our Lord wishes to suffer in this time period. But finally, remember where the victory is at. That this will not go on forever. That the present crisis will have an end. The church will triumph. Our Lady said, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. She promised at Fatima, after a good meal of sufferings, as she promised about the wars to come, the destruction of nations. But she says in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The faith will triumph. If we believe the words of Venerable Bartholomew Holzhauser, the mystic of the 17th century, this period which we find ourselves in is going to give way to the greatest period of triumph the Church has ever known. The greatest ecumenical council ever called. The great Pope, the angelic pastor, and the great King who will lead Christendom back to a restoration. That's all going to be coming in this next age. Prepared by God through a period of suffering, a period of unbelief, Bartholomew Holzhauser says. That is the mark of this era we're in. The fifth age of the church is the age of unbelief. And boy, we see it all around us, everywhere. He wrote his prophecies, his commentary on the book of Apocalypse in the 1600s, in the mid-1600s, about 1650. And he talks about this purification of the church. She loses her glory, her power, and heresy is everywhere. It's compared to 1650 was quite tame, really, except for Germany, compared to what we have now, because then the church was strong. The heretics were strong, but the church was stronger. And also, of course, the Spanish, Portuguese Empire, which spread the faith all around the world, that was still strong. And now there's no place to go. No place at all. So he if you get depressed by that thought, the thought of what we're in, think about this triumph of the Immaculate Heart, or as he says, the triumph of the church in which the gospel will be preached to all nations. All nations will be Catholic in the sixth age of the church. And I fear, or perhaps not fear, look forward, and you know what you think, I would think, will certainly see the triumph of the church. I probably will as well, because I can't see this crisis going on for 30 years or 20. There'll be nothing left at all. The crisis will get harder and more difficult, but it will give way to this great triumph. Obviously, the Pope will consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Our Lady. There will be peace given to the world, and all these non-Catholic nations will cease to exist as non-Catholic nations, and Christendom will be restored and greater than it's ever been. Think about the glory which you will see. Certainly you, children, will see. This glory of the church which is to come, in which to be Catholic will be normal. The rite of the Mass will be restored, no doubt, as it was before. The glory of the church restored, and you will get to see a period in which Catholicism and our Lord Jesus Christ will reign in the nations. A great grace. So ask the Blessed Virgin for confidence. Confidence in this trial. Confidence that we are not going to have to put up with this forever, but in the meantime, confidence that to carry the crosses that our Lord gives us. Not crosses we want, crosses He wants to give us. And pray for the gift of peace. Peace within yourself. There should always be the spirit of peace. Never agitation. Always peace of soul. That's a gift which our Lord over and over gave to His disciples. Read the Gospels after the resurrection. Peace I give you. Peace I give you. Peace. All the epistles, they always talk about peace. Peace be given. Because Christ wishes to give us peace in suffering. Peace in the cross. And the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Queen of Peace, is she who we go to in order to ask for peace. Peace of soul is a great blessing, and it will give us the strength to endure this cross, this suffering we're undergoing, in which the faith is under attack in every possible way, and the church seems to be tottering on its foundation. But fear not, for Christ will overcome this problem as He has overcome all problems. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.